Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to our side event. Apologies for the technical issues. 21st century, still this problem exists. That's, I think, part of the game. Today we're pleased to have launched a report that we think is important. It's somehow the outcome of the scientific world, a guidance that can be provided to intergovernmental agencies, governments, and different stakeholders to tell the world where we are when it comes to the SDG 6 and the implications of the lack of progress on SDG 6 for other SDGs. A lot of us interested in water resources, we know how the world is, all the targets we set in this world are interdependent and interrelated with water. Unfortunately, though, I think in the policy world, we have not understood this well, and for many, many years, we have taken water as a given resource that is unlimited. And at least when we don't have abundant water resources through financial resources, we can address that problem. As you will hear more today, our results show that neither the abundance of water nor financial resources can guarantee water security for countries. That's an important, I think, and counterintuitive finding that must be taken into consideration. Still, I'll entertain. Also, welcome all the contributors to this session, especially colleagues at different UNUs, the directors, and one of my predecessors at United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir. What we got to understand, I think this is something that we can do better and must continue to do, is to make sure that our assessments, when it comes to water resources, when it comes to understanding other the triple planetary crisis, whatever is tied to water, is based on also the narratives of the global south. It's a clear observation that a lot of scientific statements, findings, reports, and so on are dominated by the voices of the global north. That results in not properly capturing the concerns and sensitivities and problems of other parts of the world. The result is what we see today. 3 out of 4 people in the world don't have essentially water security. They live in areas that are insecure. Majority of the world is dreaming to have clean drinking water, proper sanitation. And what we are seeing is when it comes to counting, unfortunately, the number of people who die from the lack of wash services, they outnumber the number of people who die from climatic disasters, from floods and droughts and so on. And unfortunately, we don't talk about these people. We dismiss them. Where is the burden? Who suffers from this? It's lots of injustice. Unfortunately, the poor, the weak, women, children are the ones who are suffering the most. We have still no plan whatsoever to deal with some dimensions of water security. 70% of the water in the world is managed by farmers who produce our food, and for them, water is their livelihood. What happens with them going bankrupt, with them losing their jobs because of the lack of water, and the implications of this for global security, migrations, and so on. There's another issue, and that's the lack of our power to assess, lack of data availability, and so on, and the issue of scale that you would hear more about today. So with that, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kaveh, or Professor Madani. Greetings, everyone. My name is Lena Tang. I am going to be the moderator for this session, looking at global to local water security assessment. How do we measure up, and how close are our targets midway to SDG 6? My apologies for the delay, but we're hoping still to keep time. And just a warning to all the speakers and panelists, if you hear this, you have 30 seconds to wrap up. Okay, so we have a tight ship to keep, so I hope no one takes this personally. I'm happy to have everyone here today, and more excitedly to talk about water security. What a great topic, right? So thank you, Kaveh, for the introduction and opening statement. We will turn to our first of 4 presentations, followed by 4 panelists for a panel discussion. Our first presentation will be given by Dr. Charlotte McAllister, a senior researcher at UNU-INWEH, on the Global Water Security 2023 assessment.
Thanks, Lena. So I don't need to explain why we're here. We're all here because, water security is foundational to all other aspects of development. Literally today, we released the 2023 Global Water Security Assessment. Of course, there are other water security assessments, and we're going to hear about them from my colleagues. Our assessment is a global scale, so that, i.e., we're covering as many countries in the globe as possible, and at a national level, so national level statistics. So the report is available as of now on our website. So basically, for the assessment, we quantified and compared 10 components of water security in a maximum number of countries using the SDG indicated data. That's critical, right? So we're using the SDG indicated data. And in doing this, we also supported the improved data and information pillar of the Water Acceleration Framework, which is basically to provide evidence for policy and to make that SDG data available to decision makers. So we also highlight the overall status of water data availability and identify gaps and recommend improvements for the remainder of the SDG era. So you can see in the table the components that we included. They're all based, as I said, where possible. In fact, 1 to 9 are SDGs, and the 10th is not. So just quickly running through, obviously component 1 is drinking water, 2 is sanitation, 3 is health, following on from water and sanitation clearly. 4 is water quality, then we have availability, value, governance, and then 8 and 9 are basically the impacts of water disasters, so on the population, so human safety, and on the economy. And the 5th, water resource stability. So basically, everybody wants to know what the result is, essentially. Dun, 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 here it is. As I said, we tried to include the maximum number of countries. We started with a long list of 230 countries, but we had to reduce that to 186 with actually enough data to assess. The data is for 2020, which is the most recent data sets that are available. So even though this is the 2023 assessment, the data is for 2020. There is no more recent data than that for the SDG indicators. We scored, each component is scored out of 10 eventually after some analysis, and so the 10 components add up to a score of 100. And you can see basically the global scores on this map. I said it's 186 countries, but that actually accounts for 99.8% of the global population in 2020. So that's over 7.8 billion people are included in this assessment. So I'm going to refer often to the number of people. I'm talking about the number of people globally based on the national populations. So clearly, this map reveals, clear regional trends. Obviously, Africa, South and Central Asia are the orange. There's a few blue, but none that are really blue. No country scored 100. In fact, the highest scoring countries were in Europe, clearly. Sweden scored 90. Austria, Denmark, and Luxembourg scored 85. At the other end of the spectrum, Eritrea scored 29, Sudan 30, Ethiopia 31. But the lowest scoring country, in fact, was the tiny Solomon Islands, who scored 23. Vanuatu, I mean, I don't have a pointer, but I'm going to get up. So Solomon Islands are here, and Vanuatu is very close by, and Vanuatu tied with Ethiopia at 31. So we analyzed the data in several ways. And here you can see the regional distribution of the data. So we have 4, if you like, mega regions: Africa, Asia Pacific, the Americas, Europe, and then we took out the SIDS and grouped them separately for many reasons. Like many of the indicators are not ideal for SIDS, but we also feel that they're a special category. But what you can see here is, that basically 1 billion people are water secure, and they primarily live in Europe or in the US and Canada. Almost 500 million people are moderately secure. Insecure is the largest group, so 72% of the global population are water insecure. I should say I didn't describe the categories. Essentially, they're just statistical groupings based on the frequency distribution. Very simple. So when you plot the frequency distribution, there are 4 groups, very clear groups, and these are the groups that we use. So it's, in fact, I skipped ahead. I think... The 23 countries who are critically insecure include 16 LDCs and 7 SIDS. So, I mean, you can see that a lot of SIDS are in the critically insecure group, and, of course, many African countries. So, those 23 countries in the critically insecure group are primarily impeded by improving their water security in 7 of the components. So 7 of the components appear to be critical in the overall water security status. The first one, not surprisingly, is drinking water. So safely managed to basic. We group them together because if we only take safely managed, the majority of the countries in Africa and a lot of South Asia are not get 0, essentially, because they have no reported safely managed drinking water. And in fact, even 10% of the global population still lack access to basic drinking water service. Clearly, Africa is not looking great in this map. In fact, it scores lowest in water and in sanitation. So, sanitation, again, very similar pattern. Over half the population still doesn't have access to safely managed sanitation, and 22% of the global population have no access to basic sanitation. Not surprisingly, this naturally results in very high figures for wash-related mortality or wash-attributed mortality, according to WHO statistics. Again, flip back to sanitation, health, there you go. I think globally it's significant to say, and I think Javier stole my thunder here, that more people die globally from wash-attributed factors than die from water disasters. So again, following on from the WASH statistics, water quality is also coming out, is very poor, especially in Africa, South Asia. Latin America is not doing great. We could only assess based on household wastewater treatment because there are no statistics for industrial. In fact, 15 countries have only reported on their industrial wastewater treatment so far, 15, and that was in 2015, not even in 2020. So I think we can do a little bit better. So water value is basically, the revenue generated per meter cubed of water. Again, similar regional pattern. What is, I think, important to say is that water revenue doesn't necessarily translate into higher level of service or infrastructure investment or even governance. So you can see in Africa there are a number of petro states and mining states that are generating over $100 per meter cubed of water, but that does not translate into better services. Of course, governance, it remains weakest in the areas that need it most. So this is in terms of 6.5, integrated water resource management. Again, the lowest scoring countries are the countries that need better water management the most, stronger water governance. Again, so moving to water resource stability. This is not an SDG. Basically, what we looked at it was interannual variability, so how much water is available, fresh water is available from year to year, and how that could be mitigated by storage. Admittedly, we're using the ICOL data, which is the only global storage data set. So it only looks at large dams. And we'd like to use better water data and storage data in the future, so that would be an improvement in future years. But again, where interannual variability is highest, there's the least storage. Now, I said, so the first 7 were critical in limiting water security in the 23 most insecure countries. What we see when we look at the economic impact of water, essentially floods and droughts, is that this is, across the board universal. So all countries are affected by the impacts of floods and droughts. They all score badly. So, and naturally, if you have a higher economy, and this is based on impact on GDP, you're likely to have greater losses from floods and droughts. And I mentioned earlier that way more people die from WASH-attributed factors than die from water disasters, and you can see that, this, when compared on the same scale, so we used exactly the same mortality rates to score both factors, both mortality factors, far more people die from WASH than die from water disasters. Notably, you can see actually that France and the UK scored quite low on this, and that is due to heat waves in the last couple of years. So no country is immune, whatever their economy or location, from the human-related impacts of floods and droughts. Finally, stress. So stress is basically, this is a water availability. It's also an SDG 6 indicator. It's basically how much water is used compared to how much water you have available. So are you overusing your water resource? Most of Africa is not overusing its water resource. So they have enough water, but that availability of water is not reflected in other factors related to water security. So there's adequate water, but there's poor WASH, drinking, no safely managed drinking water, no safely managed sanitation, high mortality rates, highly impacted by both floods and drought. So just because you have a lot of water, it doesn't mean to say that you're immune. And finally, referring to the economic data, we also analyzed the scores in relation, this is very simplified, but looking at how the economic data related to the water security scores. And as you can see, basically all income groups, according to the World Bank income groups, suffer from water insecurity. So even the high income groups have critically insecure countries and a lot of insecure countries. But at the other end of the spectrum, the low income, no low income country is even moderately water secure. So not one single low, and not even not one lower middle income country is water secure. Using the same ranking, same classification as all of the countries globally. So only the high-income countries, according to our ranking, make it into the water secure status, the 33 countries. And that's it. And if you're interested in the data, of course, you can read the report.
It's quite innovative to look at it beyond the lens of specifically and only water scarcity. Next up, we have Alison Woodruff from ADB, who will be talking about their Asian Water Development Outlook. So would you like control of this, or would you like me to?
I'm happy to control it from there. That's
okay.
Fine. Thank you. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here on the panel talking about the Asia Water Development Outlook. You've just heard about the global water security assessments, so we're zooming into Asia and the Pacific. And this is the Asian Development Bank's flagship publication that we use as a communication tool to promote awareness on the state of water security in Asia and the Pacific. We also use it to inform policy dialogues as well with our member countries, looking at areas which require attention and where we can work with countries to support. We've been doing the Asia Water Development Outlook, or ADO for short, since 2013, and this also allows us to do a time comparison to track progress on water security in our member countries. And in some countries, it's good to see that there is gradual improvements. Sorry. Okay. So we look at 5 key dimensions of water security under the ADO. So we look at rural household water security, urban water security, economic water security, environmental water security, and water-related disaster security to provide a comprehensive picture of the state of water security in the region. Each of these key dimensions is rated on a score of 1 to 20, and then that's aggregated to get the overall country, and this is the country-level scoring, the overall national state of water security. And so the lowest is nascent, up to model. And it's interesting to hear Charlotte's assessment as well. We have some consistencies. So no country is model. So not even Japan, New Zealand, they're in the effective stage. And the good news is in nascent, there's only one country. Obviously, we'd like it to be 0, but Afghanistan is the only nascent country in the region. The most of the countries in Asia Pacific fall in the capable and engaged areas. So just very quickly, rural household water security, which assesses the extent to which countries provide sufficient, safe, physically accessible, affordable water and sanitation services for health livelihoods, coupled with an acceptable level of water-related risk in rural households. And we have several indicators that we use. I won't go into detail because of time limits, but we have the report online. So if you're interested, please do read that. For economic water security, we look at, we try and measure the broad economy and then state of the water economy in terms of looking at the overall water balance and water infrastructure to support economic development, and then zero in on important sectors, so agriculture, energy, and industry. For urban water security, again, we look at which countries are providing safely managed and affordable water and sanitation services for urban communities to sustainably achieve the desired outcomes. Again, we look at indicators like access to water supply and sanitation using the JMP data. We look at affordability. We look at drainage flood risks and environment as well. We also look at environmental water security, looking at the health of rivers, wetlands, groundwater systems. We measure progress on restoring aquatic ecosystems to health on a national and regional scale. And then finally, on water-related disasters, we look at a nation's recent exposure to water-related disasters, their vulnerability to those disasters, and their capacity to resist and bounce back. So this is a snapshot of the 2020 ADO scoring. As I mentioned, the majority of countries fall into as you see, the yellow and green. They follow into the engaged and capable stage. So this represents about 2 billion people still being water secure despite improvements, and I'll just talk about some of the improvements. These, of course, the scoring leads to some policy recommendations in terms of what countries can do to address the different dimensions of water security. I won't go into detail. But yeah, there's a positive trend over time looking at the different ADOs from 2013 to 2020. Positive to see, of course, the most populated countries. So China has moved from engaged to capable from 2013 to 16. India moved from nascent to engaged. So that's a positive trend. But there's still, and sorry, that's a typo, there's still 2 billion people living in water insecure situations. So 22 of the 49 countries covered by the ADO are still in the nascent and engaged. So it shows that there's a lot to be done to improve the state of water security in the region. The ADO has also been adopted within countries, which is great. So in India, the state of Karnataka has actually done the ADO for their state, and they've used this to look at the different water security dimensions, and they've used that to actually inform policy. So it's great to see the ADO tool being adopted and used at a state level and within countries. The ADO has also, I'll just move to the next. Also in China, the ADO has been used at the basin scale for the Yellow River Basin. To measure the overall water security at the entire basin level. And when doing this exercise, the 18 indicators along those 5 dimensions were selected. And the good news is, in this particular case, the findings were that the Yellow River Basin was essentially water secure. Similar exercises have been done in Thailand and Bhutan, so it's great to see the ADO sort of adopted and institutionalized within our countries and used as a tool for measuring water security. So as I mentioned, if you're interested, please do go to our website and download the ADO report. We also have a methodology report where you can look at the detailed methodology that's been used for the ADO 2020. We also have an interactive database, so you can go in and look at the data. And moving forward, we're looking for the next issue of the ADO to be released in 2025, and we're now having conversations around the methodology. We're looking at how we can bring more forward outlook analysis on things like risk and climate change. We're looking at how we can better measure inclusion of certain groups, focusing on maybe gender to see whether we can integrate that as well. And we're also looking to see whether we can integrate governance. For the ADO 2020, we sort of had a parallel report looking at the state of governance in Asia and the Pacific. But recently, we've been working with OECD, developing a scorecard for measuring the enabling environment for water finance. So we may be able to convert that to an index and integrate it into the ADO. So these are the discussions that are ongoing on methodology for the next issue. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison, for your presentation. The next speaker is my apologies, the next speaker is Professor Kensuke Fukushi from UNU-INWEH. So one moment while I bring your...
Just to correct my presentation so that
Yes.
Okay, can you...
I will be happy to click through if you don't mind narrating.
Very good. Thank you very much. This is Ken Fukushi. I'm there from the UNU-INWEH, located in Tokyo, and I'm there... UNU has a 4 thematic and academic thematic area. One of them is water and resource management. I'm have been head of that thematic area quite a long time. And today we talk about valuing water. Last 2 presentations is basically country-wide, the comparison. However, we'd like to have a little bit more final resolution in order to to help the action to improve the water quality. Next slide, please. This is it's very, the general one, economy, environment, human, we have to take a balance. However, in the next slide, please. In the past, this is maybe surprise. This is a 50 years picture of the Tokyo. It's like one of the developing nation, but this is Tokyo. However, now next slide, please. It's exactly same river. It's going to be like this. This is one of the experience that we know, our experience in Japan. Next slide, please. Of course, technology is not only things. However, we have to understand what is important. The water is a resources. However, at the same time, it is environment. And based on the environment, we have environment, economy, or quality of life, human issues. On the top of that, so we have to have a quite nice balance. And in order to quantitatively assess this balance, we have to have some tools. Is a little bit more focused in their city level, municipality level, and then finally, of course, it's going to be country level or global level. But this tool that we developed is basically in the municipality level. Next slide, please. Sorry, very busy things, but left top, economy. Economy is very closely related to the water quality in urban area. And right upper side is society. How the society is reflecting their, it's actually a mirror of their economy. And then environment is a result of the two issues related to it. Then finally, we want to have a relation. If we have a very large population, we have a lot of the economic activity happen, and some industry release a lot of the pollutant, some not. So depending on their area, we have a characteristic of the portfolio of the economy. So depending on their city, we can really customize our tool. Next slide, please. One of the overall, their output and benefit, and overall the established structural relationship of economy and environment. We can project the future, not just snapshot of this year, but we can project 5 years, 10 years. Economic projection cannot go beyond 10 years, actually. However, we can project it, we can design it. Municipality want to have, hey, we want to have more hotel business. We want to have more producing business. We want to have more focus in the food industries. So government, based on this kind of strategy, the government can do subsidies, or investor can invest that economy. And we will know what kind of pollution, what kind of burden to the water environment will receive based on that projection. Next slide, please. Of course, we have basic concept, and we have to do some case study. And these 4 cities we selected based on the data availability and the different type of their economic portfolio. Next slide, please. This is one of the little bit difficult to understand, but this is how the water consumption is projected current, and then at this point, industry is based on a lot of their supply chain. For example, food industry, coming from agriculture, transportation, processing, canning, again, package and transport and sale, wholesale, and then direct sale. So these food, the supply chain is producing, consuming water and producing waste. This is showing about their direct consumption and indirect consumption water. Based on this, we can project not only certain industry, but also related industry water demand. Next slide, please. Please go to next. Yes, please ignore. Yeah, this is a changes of the water demand. Actually, similar things that in previous slide. However, in the food crop, other crop, livestock, food, beverages. So very simple. The industry, for example, livestock, does not have much of a change. Crop as well. However, food and beverages have a quite long supply chain, having a lot of indirect, their consumption. That's why current one and future one. This is a current one and future one. We can make some simple projection, just 25% of the final demand is increased. Then we can project the future water demand precisely in the entire food chain. Supply chain. Next slide, please. Can you go quick? Yeah. Thank you very much. This is one of the showing that the food and beverages industry what kind of supply chain is related to the food and beverages. Agriculture, pulp and paper, machinery, equipment, transport, everything is related. And we use economics tool called the input-output table, and providing each supply chain load to the pollution load to the environment, as well as the water consumption. Next slide, please. And this is a BOD discharge in the Lyon province in Thailand, and to the direct discharge to the water body. Next slide, please. And this is indirect, including indirect. This is rubber and plastic industry. Not only just direct industry from this factory, but also this by existing having this rubber and plastic industry, we have a lot of indirect discharge, which is 10 times larger than that of the direct discharge from the factory. Yes, I know. Next slide, please. This is, I said, I don't need to really read it, but this is our supply chain showing that this is input-output table, and we have 58 to 72 different sectors of industry, and then we're showing the entire discharge and consumption. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a BOD discharge and the BOD, the biochemical oxygen demand, which is pollutant, and direct pollution and indirect pollution. And depending on industry, we have two different ones. Next slide, please. Okay, we have three take-home messages here. We have developed tool, and it is ready to use. But in the course of study about this, and water is really, one of the key, a central issue on their entire economy. So that kind of things obviously seen in the cities, not entire country, but the city is a kind of their condensed part of the economy. So we can see the pollution and consumption really, illustrated in the city. Next, we need to integrate tool to that address plural and multiple dimension society, economy, environment, well-being. And we have a finer resolution tool in order to measure this. Finally, we need to promote regenerative, this is a very catchy word, in the COP, we all talk about, we have to regenerative planning of the resource and improvement of the well-being of society. So we work for the well-being of society, but we have a very kind of their precise tool that can be used by the municipality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fukuchi, for apologies. Thank you, Professor Fukushi, for highlighting the integral role of water in our urban ways, our urban cities. Next, I have speaking Professor Sarah Young from Northwestern. Apologies. Why isn't this? Sarah, do you want to? Yeah, we can swap spots, okay? So apologies. I don't know why it's not. Why do I not see it? Yeah, I know it should be open, but I don't see it. Seems to just be loading. It should be duplicating, so it shouldn't be off screen.
It's a heavy file. It's a heavy file.
Oh, it's a heavy file? Do you think that's the reason why it's not loading? Sarah, I know it's not going to be pretty, but should we just open the other PowerPoint file? So, apologies. Sarah did send us a PDF, which should have been properly formatted in a Mac computer, but of course, we work with PC. There's some incompatibility here, but we still are able to make it work, right, Sarah? So, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's really an honor to be on this panel. I appreciate the organizers for pulling us all together to be able to look at water insecurity, across scales. So I think we can all agree that leaving no one behind is the objective of all of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I would argue that current global water indicators don't tell us precisely enough who is being left behind. So, and I came to experience this firsthand. So in 2013, I was a baby assistant professor studying food insecurity. Turned out water was really important, and I wanted to measure Kenyan women's experiences with water access and use. But common indicators made her seem water secure. So right behind this woman is Lake Victoria, so there's plenty of water physically available. And there's a sim tank right on her household premises, which meant that she would have probably better than basic drinking water access services. But if you see behind her, this is her mother-in-law who's not letting her use the sim tank water.
and she had to go and fetch water from a distance, and in fact ended up going into premature labor. So as someone who cares a lot about public health and maternal and child nutrition, I needed more precise and more holistic information about women's experiences with water. So I went to the literature to see how water was currently being measured, and certainly there are lots and lots of ways to measure water. And we can measure physical availability, we can measure accessibility, we can measure safety. There's some good indicators of reliability if drinking water is available when needed. But what I was looking for was something more holistic and more precise to know exactly what was happening with this precise woman. And this was not a revolutionary idea. I mean, I had the idea of thinking about experiences because I'm trained in nutrition, and many of you will know that the food insecurity experiences scale is a really important indicator for SDG 2. Every year, Gallup World Poll measures the proportion of people in 100-plus countries of what their experiences with food insecurity are. And so we and a whole bunch of people, some of whom I saw in the hallway today, got together to create the Water Insecurity Experiences Scales. So it was an effort across disciplines, across time zones, across career stages. It involved a lot of blood, sweat, tears, statistics collection, data analysis, and the data collection came from 28 sites globally. And I will kind of spare you all of the efforts that went into that to say you can read about them online at hwise.org. But for our purposes today, you should just know that the first scale that we created was the household version of the scale. And it asked about the experiences in the last 4 weeks with, for example, not being able to wash your clothes, for example, having to change the food that you ate, specifically because of problems with water. And problems with water is a big enough term to cover problems with too much water, too little water, and water of poor quality. So the response options are scored, and with 12 items and a maximum score of 3 per item, 12 times 3 is 36. It takes 3 minutes to administer, so it's quite agile, and we have a short version that makes it possible to assess prevalence but not severity in just 1 minute with 4 items. So we went from the household scale to the individual level scale, which I find to be quite informative if we care about looking at disparities. I mean, we have some gender-sensitive data, but I think it's really important to get gender-disaggregated data in order to understand when the rubber hits the road, what are women experiencing in terms of water for drinking, for cooking, for hygiene. And the wind is a bit in our sails. A number of organizations have taken up this scale. It's been implemented in a lot of places. There are translations available for many places on our website. USAID, for example, is implementing this scale in their Zone of Influence midline survey, so we should have just a bunch of data coming in from that. Very excitingly, the government of Mexico put the HY scale into the National Health and Nutrition Survey, which means that we'll be getting really rich data not only on water insecurity, but how it co-varies with anthropometry, dietary diversity, mental health, and so on and so forth. We now have lots of data coming in. And while I could lecture at you for hours about all of the findings that we've had, I will spare the horn. And I'll just say that the evidence that is being generated is truly multisectoral. So I would submit to you that it's worth measuring experiences with water insecurity if you care about water. But if you care about economic well-being, if you care about nutrition, if you care about physical health indicators, and we have data on, like HIV viral load, if you care about mental health, we are finding very strong relationships between experiences with water insecurity and all of these outcomes. So just as one example, we were so fortunate that Gallup World Polls measured both water insecurity experiences and food insecurity experiences in the same 45,000 individuals. And so FAO and us, we got together and put our data together. And what we can say is across 25 countries, when you control for all of the things that we know shape food insecurity, gender, income, urbanicity, education, water insecurity was associated with a 2 to 3 times higher odds of being moderately to severely food insecure which just drives the point home that if we care about food insecurity, we also need to care about water insecurity. I'd really like to see this experiential measure be the bridge between SDG 2 and SDG 6. So the Y skills can be used at multiple levels. We can use them at a country level, but we can also use them at a community level, and this has been used with great success by, for example, Oxfam and Helvetis to do a before and after of some intervention. It also helps us to understand how water insecurity shapes, as I said, depression, mental health, infant feeding practices. And taking those together, we can use that information to make decisions about investments, to advocate for resources, and to get the ear of policymakers. I mean, my ethnography is fascinating, but no one wants to read that. What they want is a couple of numbers, and we can give that to them with this. So I'll conclude by telling you my evil plans. Full disclosure. So right now, we have nationally representative data on water insecurity in 41 countries. And what I would like to see in the future is that we paint this map green. Should be blue. We paint this map with water insecurity data for all. And the reason is not fatal error is very scary sounding. Maybe my evil. Those data are not a fatal error. Those data are meant to inform policy. They should be a global public good that anyone can look at as they decide where and who exactly needs support for becoming water secure the most. I would love to advance to my final slide. Yes. No. So the Y scales offer a lot of insights. I think of them as very complementary to all of the other great data that we have. I mean, there's no one water indicator that fits all purposes. But if we want to know what the human experience is with water, I would encourage us to start to think about measuring experiences with it. I will leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Young, for that insightful presentation, especially looking at the household and individual levels of water insecurity. Really innovative. I have scheduled here a Q&A with our first 4 presenters, but I am warning you, we are running a bit over time, partly because of IT difficulties. So if everybody can please hold their questions, and we'll move on to the next part of the agenda. We will hopefully have time at the end of the session for our Q&As. So the next, we have a short intervention by Professor Edeltraud Günther. Am I saying that correctly?
Perfectly pronounced.
My German.
Perfect.
The director of UNU Flores. So the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the presenters for their insights in quantifying and measuring water security, because I think this is the starting point for informed decision making. And you highlighted this. I would like to draw your attention to 4 topics, 4 conclusions we could take from your presentations. First is we need to identify the low-hanging fruits. I think this is really important, what to do with this data. And if we look at the economic, the ecological, and the social dimension of sustainability, we could look at high water security, low cost, and social acceptance. You spoke about women, for example. I think that's important. So first, identify low-hanging fruit. Second, we need to develop a water culture. What does this mean? It's a combination of cognitive norms. That means, how do we value water? That's what we discuss a lot here in the conference. What can we also learn from traditional knowledge? We had discussions here of indigenous communities. And what role does water play in education? I think that's also important. So cognitive norms as one dimension of water culture. Second, practices as a second dimension of water culture. What is the impact of women's responsibility for water? You highlighted this. How can water be saved? So the practices as second pillar of water culture. And the third, technologies, innovation. Are wastewater treatment facilities available? How can nature-based solutions be leveraged? So developing a water culture with cognitive norms, practices, and technologies needs measuring and quantifying water security. So we had now identifying low-hanging fruits, developing a water culture. Third, we need to overcome barriers. Very often we implement something, it doesn't work, we implement something else. Look at barriers. Why didn't the plan work? And what we observe very often when it comes to water security is a bystander effect. We did studies, for example, on micropollutants. It's always the other who is responsible, and it's a psychological aspect, actually. So overcoming barriers. And the third one is often neglected. I'm an accountant by training. We need to calculate the costs of inaction. Not making a decision is a decision against water security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for those 4 very meaningful points. We're now moving on to the panel discussion. We have 4 panelists here today for you. The first of whom is Dr. Rick Johnson from the World Health Organization, who will be speaking today on SDG 6.1, Progress and Inequalities in Drinking Water Access. So, the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation to join the panel. I'm Rick Johnson from WHO, and I found those presentations really interesting. Congratulations to all of you. I think composite indicators and indices like these are really useful because a single measure of the quality of water services can't capture a full story. There are so many different dimensions, and bundling them into one number is useful, especially to make comparisons and look at benchmarking. But it's also very useful to be able to unpack it again and to see, well, which of the factors are the really bottlenecks here, and it seemed like these examples all offer that capability as well, so that's very nice. It also seemed like the different indices that were being used came to similar conclusions about the distribution, the magnitude of water insecurity, so that's also good news. And especially where trend analysis is available, that's super value, because then you can see not just what's the situation today, but is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better faster in some areas or for some populations than others? And that's just very valuable information. So then if I turn to the SDG framework and SDG target 6.1 on drinking water, well, first, the SDG framework is a lot more ambitious than the MDGs, of course. And we have this new indicator of safely managed drinking water services, which is also a composite indicator. It talks about having an improved water supply, but one that's accessible on premises, one where water is actually available when needed, and one where that water is free from contamination. So it's also an index. One interesting thing we found looking at that index is that in different countries, in different settings, different elements of that composite indicator are more challenging. So in about half of the countries in the world, drinking water quality is the toughest challenge to meet. But if we look at rural Africa, rural sub-Saharan Africa, the drinking water quality is better than having water supplies located on premises. It's very rare to have a water supply located on premises, so that ends up being the limiting factor. If we look at some middle income and upper income countries like in Latin America or Eastern Europe, there is water on premises. It's good quality. It's not available when needed because there are challenges with intermittent water supply. So different aspects of any multi-component index can end up being the ones that are really relevant for policies. And by the way, the SDG indicator doesn't include affordability, even though it's in the text of the SDG target, because we couldn't figure out how to measure it. So I'm really interested to hear how ADB measures and monitors affordability. Just a couple numbers. I have to throw out some numbers. There's good news with progress towards safely managed drinking water. Since 2000, about 2 billion people globally have gotten safely managed drinking water services that didn't have it before. Some of them weren't born before, so this is population growth, but urbanization. But that's more people being served, and that's resources and investments. If we slow down a little bit, that's like an average rate of progress. If we look at trends, it can look really slow. Like 1 percentage point per year or 2 percentage points per year is really good. And if you're thinking in terms of 3-5 year project time frame, that can be really frustrating. But if you step back and look at, decades, then you can see that there is real progress happening. It's just, sometimes takes a long time. If we try and disaggregate then and see like who's gaining access to these services, the biggest population that's gained access has been the urban population. And that's people moving to urban areas and getting services that were already good. It's urban planners and utilities keeping up as best as they can with that big population growth. Oh, okay, really? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's, if we think about other kinds of disaggregation, it's great to see that some of these indices can be disaggregated by sector or maybe by river basin, by gender. That's just so useful. I'll skip the example I had there, except to say that we're looking at data on this burden of collection of water from off-premises and how that's distributed. And we can see that especially in sub-Saharan Africa, this burden is very large, and it's the women, and to a smaller extent, the girls who are responsible for bringing water into the home. In Malawi, on average, women and girls spend an hour collecting water from sources that are off-premises. And that's an average which masks distribution, so there are some definite inequalities there. I will just stop right there, I think. Thanks very much. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next up is Julie Truelove from WaterAid Canada, who will be speaking to the role of civil society to achieve water security, gender inequities, gaps, and barriers.
Thanks very much, Lena. Thanks, everyone. I'll focus mainly on 3 areas that I feel that civil society really has a role to play.
Is your mic on?
Sorry, has a role to play in really bringing this data and evidence to life. So really, the role of advocacy and influencing is needed at all levels. So there's global spaces like we're in this week where we bring this data to life and really get those messages across to influencers. And subnational and national level, we need that policy influencing to track budgets and to make sure that budget allocations are going where they're needed most. So I think the community-led advocacy as well requires that experiential learning that Sarah was talking about to really get an understanding of how do we bring this evidence and data into policy and into practice as well. And so I think also the role of civil society is also to look at advocating for what gets measured. So there's been references to gender and gender exclusion in much of the work that we're doing. And so how do we make sure that that's inclusive and really understand why progress is slow for some and who is being left behind in the work that's coming along. And so how do we then use that data to demonstrate that to decision makers and work alongside them to bring those marginalized groups out as well. And I think lastly as well in terms of civil society is amplifying the voices of people that are not in this room. The vast majority of people that face this burden every day are not in this space where we are this week. And so I think civil society has a role to play in really bringing that forward, bringing those voices together, but working alongside people, not speaking on their behalf, but really raising their voices in spaces where not everyone can be present. Just one example of this is before COP27, we were looking at Charlotte's data and the work that she was already doing on the assessment, and we knew that progress on SDG 6 was too slow. And so how do we bring that together with what we also knew were women and girls suffering the most in the face of climate change? So we bring together actors for a webinar, for breakout sessions and discussions, and developed a joint statement that we put forward on women in water on the front lines of climate change. So it was really bringing the data and evidence into the calls to action, but really demonstrating how we can, as a movement, as civil society together, we can raise our voices to really move this into the priorities of decision makers and influencers where we need it most, which is at all levels of government and society. So I think I will stop there, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julie. Next up, we have Manka Clay from also WaterAid. She's the Regional Advocacy Manager in the East Africa office. Did I pronounce her name correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. the presenters. The information you gave us is quite a mouthful, and it's a tool for advocacy on our side. I would like to share the experience from East Africa, and I represent Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Rwanda. So looking at the state of water where we are now and the road towards achieving SDG 6 by 2030, the progress is not good. By 2015, the JMP told us basic water access was 50%. 5 years later, in 2020, we achieved a progress of 6%, and we are at 56% right now. So in 5 years' time, the progress we have made is only 6%. We are 7 years towards the goal, and the progress is not good. If I'm talking about WASH in healthcare facilities, the data are telling us that we are at 43%. So we have 67 healthcare facilities which do not have access to basic water. When it comes to WASH in schools, we have 32% of basic access. That means 70% of the schools do not have access. So the progress is really worrying. We are challenged with climate change. Is posing a really threat to achieve the progress. Looking at drought in Kenya, looking at heavy rainfalls, we are experiencing destruction of WASH infrastructures because of floods. We are experiencing drying of water resources because of drought, and this is worsening the situation. Right now, we are supposed to be having rains. They came in quite late, and they are quite heavy. So you can imagine that we are adding problems into already existing problems. Looking at the budget that goes to water, just water alone. In Kenya and in Rwanda, the allocation of water budget out of the national budget for this particular financial year is around 1.7% out of the national total budget. And yet we feel that water is critical and it sits at the center of economic activities. So we feel that it is not getting the attention it deserves. So that is the real situation from East Africa. We have a long way to go in terms of achieving the targets by 2030. Apart from the budget allocation and climate change, I would like to also share the fact that fresh water, we are competing with other things. Agriculture alone is taking around 70% of the fresh water. Yet there is energy production, there is manufacture and industry, there is livestock, there is energy production. And we feel like water for drinking is a basic human right. It is second to none. So looking at the current investment, we are not happy. So she mentioned about the advocacy that we are doing, and I would like to end up there because she has covered what we are doing in order to address the situation. So thank you so much for being able to share this particular experience from WaterAid East Africa.
Thank you, Ms. Clay, for sharing. And last but not least from our panel, Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse, representing the Assembly of First Nations. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Miigwech for being here today. Thank you. My name is Cindy Woodhouse. I'm with the Assembly of First Nations, and I come from Manitoba, Canada, a First Nation there. And I'm honored to be here to work in solidarity with all of you on water issues, and especially reducing inequalities and access to clean water for all peoples. Thank you to the event organizers, United Nations University, and all the organizations listed in the program for this side event. I bring greetings to you all from the Assembly of First Nations and from the 63 First Nations where I come from, who elected me as their regional chief. Water is a sacred part of our way of life, and is central to our health and livelihoods. As Indigenous peoples, we work hard to uphold our inherent responsibilities as caretakers of water. My first point is that First Nations' responsibilities to water and our rights as people with the right to self-determination and treaty rights includes all aspects of water use, jurisdiction, and stewardship, as well as water governance over drinking water and sanitation. Second, let me say how important the concept is of global to local water security. First Nations understand this. We always focus on the relationship between people and the relationship between humans and the natural world. Our view is holistic. This lens must be applied in short, medium, and long-term strategies for water security at the global, national, and local level. We know that we cannot have local water security without global commitment and water action to protect all water and to realize the human right to clean drinking water and sanitation for all. I must also add that First Nations are not local communities, but rather people with the right to self-determination. First Nations often say that water is life, and we mean that for everybody. We are concerned about future pressures on water sources nationally and globally, and what that means for health and water security in the broadest sense. My primary focus at this water forum is realizing the human right to safe drinking water and to adequate sanitation services for First Nations in Canada. In Canada, we have a focused, good deal on ending long-term water advisories in First Nations communities as a metric of progress that is relevant to Sustainable Development Goal 6. While we have made significant progress in partnership with Canada, we are not there yet. As of February of this year, 32 First Nations are still under a long-term boil water advisory, down from 105 in 2015. The government's commitment to eliminate all long-term drinking water advisories is not fully met yet, and too many First Nations experience shorter-term boil water advisories that are lifted and then reinstated again and again. One of the reasons I am here is to keep the pressure on, because this is a matter of human rights and has real impacts on the daily lives of the First Nations affected. That leads to my second point about measuring progress. While the status of long-term boil water advisories is a very important performance measure, it is simply one metric. We need to look at the whole picture of water security for First Nations. From a First Nations perspective of our own water security situation, other performance measures are equally irrelevant. For example, is there a sufficient protection of watersheds and source water in our traditional territories and beyond? What financial commitments for sustainable, predictable funding to First Nations are being made, and over what time frame? To close the infrastructure gap and to support operations, maintenance, training, and capacity development, our federal legislation and policy when targeting First Nations drinking water agencies, First Nations-led and First Nations-driven, is the free, prior, and informed consent standard in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples being interpreted and operationalized properly when water legislative development issues are on the table? Do First Nations have access to the waterways and ice roads that we have relied on for transportation and access to our traditional lands? We greatly appreciate the international focus that the United Nations Water Conference and the United Nations system generally can bring. We still need your support on SDG 6 and Indigenous peoples. As I sit here, I am wondering how we can build on this momentum. In addition to the products of the Water Conference, I'm looking ahead to the 2023 High-Level Political Forum and its ministerial declaration process, and to the annual exercise of drafting a General Assembly resolution on the rights of Indigenous peoples. At this midpoint of the water decade, I think it's time for a specific and intensified call to action respecting SDG 6, the right to safe drinking water and sanitation, and Indigenous peoples, perhaps in the next ministerial declaration of the High-Level Political Forum, or in the next UNGA resolution on the rights of Indigenous peoples, or both, and we could develop wording like this: affirming the need to accelerate efforts and to take measures in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples to fully realize safe drinking water and proper sanitation for all Indigenous peoples and all aspects of water security in keeping with their protocols, values, and laws. And emphasizing free, prior, informed consent is a requirement throughout legislative and regulatory development initiatives impacting Indigenous peoples, including on safe drinking water and sanitation issues as required by Article 19 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I also hold portfolios at the Assembly of First Nations for emergency management, climate-induced crises, whether from too much water or too little water threaten the safety and security of our people.
My apologies, Regional Chief.
I'll just close off with this last statement, please. The Assembly of First Nations is committed to working in partnership with our allies in Canada and around the world to accelerate change to solve the global water and sanitation crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one final short intervention by Professor Shinobu Yumi from the Director of UNU-INWEH, Institute of Advanced Study.
And thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, and I am very happy to be here. Thank you very much, and I'd like to congratulate the main organizers and all the speakers and panelists for your very unique and very high quality presentations, and also the diverse opinion coming from international organizations, civil society, and regional representatives. I really enjoyed it very much. Since the director Edel made a the point, and we are pressed for the time, so I just don't want to repeat your statement, but just 3 additional points that I found very important from the presentation. One sentence I'd like to conclude for today's session is really this session confirmed that the protecting and promoting the sustainable water management is a collective responsibility, which really required concerted action by all the stakeholders. I think that's we can all agree. Okay, so in this context, 3 short points. First of all, I attended the dialogue session yesterday on the Nexus approach, and everybody is talking about importance of evidence-based knowledge and solutions. It is true, but what is really important is that those evidence-based knowledge and solution really has to mobilize different kind of stakeholder. It cannot be done only by the researchers, nor just the policymakers. It really has to be a collaboration of the researcher, policymaker, and local community. So, for example, the actual analytical framework that Professor Fukushi had mentioned, with the example in India, Indonesia, Nepal, and Thailand, those the analytical framework, actually utilized by the researcher, policymaker, but also the local community, and they organized a workshop, actually explaining what about this analytical framework and actual result, so that every single participant can really understand why this framework is so important. Okay, so I really want to emphasize those evidence-based knowledge and solution really has to be shared by all the stakeholders. And second, those research activity has to be very much closely related to the national water governance capacity. And we really have to promote the exchange of the technology information and development and the implementation of legislation, monitoring and other relevant the activities by the member state in a different region, between the regions. And just for your information, just last week, in March 18th, we have hosted an online side event as a part of this UN Water Conference, valuing urban water in Asia for achieving sustainable development. And it was participated in many, that's time, okay? Yeah, but we really confirmed the importance of capturing the social, economic, and environment dimension to emphasize the need of promoting value of reused water, okay, and for the circular economy, and underline importance of strengthening cross-sector collaboration. Okay, so last of all, we are very happy to announce our official commitment by our institute under the Water Action Agenda, our 2-year initiatives partnership for the urban water sustainability in Asia will bring together the academic institutions and the government in Asia to assess the water quality in cities that is essential for achieving sustainable development. And this is just a little the brochure and how the university can really contribute with the network and promoting water and other the sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I'm going to now turn to Professor Madani for the final words for this session.
We're over time. I just want to thank you all for your contributions. Thanks for your patience and attendance. And I think it's very clear what's missing, and it's very clear what's important. Let's fight the fight collectively, and let's change the views of and understanding of the world leaders when it comes to water resources. Good luck to you all.